Alright guys, in today's video I'll be doing this meta report. I generally don't ask for, likes or comments too much, but this took me all day and a friend of mine all day to put together these couple of graphics. So if you enjoy the video, please leave a like and comment. It'd help grow the channel and I would really appreciate it. So what I did was we took we have 8 decks here and we gave their matchup spreads amongst each other. So these are decks that have a very large percentage of the meta share, and then we scored them at the end with how much they interact with each other. Notably, there's no Arcanine or Charizard in here. I just never see those decks, and it just wasn't something I was like super concerned with covering. I think I got the 8 that I think most people were concerned with. Notably, we have Pikachu and Pikachu Raichu, and we have Celebi and Celebi EX as variants here, and that's because they notably had very significant differences in their matchup spreads. So if we take a look at Mewtwo here, we have a favorable into Pikachu and a favorable into Pikachu Raichu variant, although the Raichu variant is much closer to 50-50, which is what it always kind of felt like to me, which is one of the reasons why I like running the Raichu. One of the reasons I like running the Raichu variant. Mewtwo gets absolutely hosed by Gyarados. As you can see, it's just because Gyarados with a Giovanni can just one-shot the Mewtwo and nothing they can really do about it. Gyarados can also take out 2 Mewtwo's back-to-back because Mewtwo can't side drive Gyarados in one hit, so it just makes that really, really difficult. Mewtwo also has a good matchup into Celebi because, again, they can side drive in just one shot the Celebi. It notably goes down to almost an even matchup, though, when they include, Executor EX, because that can't be one shot, provides more tankiness, more stall, either to potentially set up for a bigger Celebi swing, or you can just get lucky and get 2 heads with Executor and knock out the Mewtwo. So it's much better there, much closer to even, but the pure Celebi like superior or Celebi superior with like 1 line of Executor EX just doesn't cut it. And then one of Mewtwo's worst matchups, and the only reason this deck exists basically in any fashion, is the Scolipede Weezing deck, and we saw this with the last meta report when it was Weezing Arbok, and then Mewtwo has an extremely favorable matchup into Aerodactyl being able to one-shot everything, and there's just nothing really Aerodactyl does to threaten Mewtwo. So it really seems like outside of bricking, Mewtwo is just going to crush them. You can also see we got all of these matchups color-coded, obviously, and we have the key here on the right, so I won't get too much into that. It's pretty self-explanatory. Pikachu Zebstrika build into Mewtwo is unfavored, not by a ton, but it's significant. It's almost it's like 6% unfavored. Pikachu into the Raichu variant of Pikachu is slightly unfavored, even though it's just a couple of percentage points. Pikachu hoses Gyarados, obviously because type advantage. Pikachu's fast, and the Zebstrika version has Zebstrika, so you can get the Magikarp off the bench, right, which is very relevant. Then we have Pikachu into Celebi. It's favored into Celebi because Pikachu's, again, it's more consistent, it's faster. It's not too drastic, but I mean, we're talking about almost 6 percentage points, so it's definitely statistically relevant. And then we have Pikachu into the Celebi Executor matchup, and that's a lot harder for Pikachu. That's almost a free matchup for Celebi Executor because you can basically blank their turns with Erica and Potions, and then one head flip from Executor will result in a 2-turn clock on Pikachu, which I think is very significant. By the way, all of these tournament stats were pulled from Limitless. I didn't find a graphic myself, and so we took game sprites and just created this on our own, and that's what took so long. Let's see. We also have Pikachu into Scolipede. Obviously, Pikachu's faster, more consistent. No surprise there. Pikachu does get absolutely bodied by Aerodactyl decks, and that's mostly, I think, because of the presence of Marshadow, and then like Primeape, hitting really, really hard, really easily. Primeape can 2-shot Pikachu. Aerodactyl one-shots Pikachu, or excuse me, doesn't one-shot Pikachu, but does really well against it. It's a tanky, can pivot out of the way. Some of the decks run, even like far-fetched Marshadow decks don't do too badly, but Marshadow is definitely making the difference here, right? And then we have the Raichu variant of Pikachu, has a much closer matchup to Mewtwo. It's almost even as compared to the the Pikachu Zebstrika build. Again, it's slightly favored. And then against Gyarados, we're still very favored. We're not as favored as Zebstrika build. I don't know how relevant that actually is. You're already so favored. But if you really wanted to shore up that matchup, you could just give some percentage points away from Mewtwo and go towards a matchup you're already winning. So up to you. And then we have the Raichu and the Celebi. It beats Celebi a lot more consistently, about like 5% more ish, and that's because Raichu can just one shot the Celebi. And so Pikachu can't just, hit it for 90, they Erica, and then you get into this dance of like, how many heals do they have? How many attacks do I have? You can just one-shot the thing, right? Barely has a better matchup into Executor EX that almost is statistically irrelevant. And then into Scolipede, we're not as favored, but we're still very favored. And then Aerodactyl, apparently we are much less favored into Aerodactyl, but that's already a matchup that's completely abysmal, so it doesn't really matter. So what you're doing is, if you go with the Raichu variant over the Zebstrika variant, it seems like you have a much more even matchup spread as the Raichu build, and you're just giving up percentages here and there that don't really matter. And then the Gyarados, we have a super favorable matchup into Mewtwo, obviously, because we can just one-shot the Mewtwo with a Giovanni. Bad matchup into Pikachu for reasons already stated. Bad matchup into Raichu for reasons already stated. And then we have a fantastic Celebi matchup because we can just one-shot them. So it's basically like a Raichu every attack, right? Looks like it might even be, it's slightly worse into the Executor, but it's basically the same. Destroys Scolipede, gets wrecked by Aerodactyl. And I think that's because a lot of the Aerodactyl decks are also teching Hitmonlee. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that the Pikachu Zebstrika build and the Aerodactyl builds that run one Hitmonlee are sniping the Magikarps and doing a good job. Also, I expect that the Aerodactyl decks also make Gyarados have to go through 3 1-point Pokemon a considerable amount of the time. Like, you can make them have to go through, like, let's say Primeape and then double Marshadow, which could be an issue. So let's see. We've got Celebi, unfavorable to Mewtwo. We've been over this. Apparently it's favorable into Pikachu, which is interesting. Yeah, favorable into Pikachu. Again, I suspect that's because of the heals. Favorable into Raichu, but barely. And then we've got losing the Gyarados, again, because we're getting one shot all the time. And then there was exactly the only real 50-50 once we eliminated the draws for tournaments. That's why some of the stats are like slightly off. We didn't get rid of like all the draws all the time because people draw on purpose to get into top cuts. We just did it whenever the percentages were like really close to 50. But the Executor variant versus the Celebi Superior variants are actually 50-50, which is really crazy. And then Celebi versus Scolipede were favored, and then it's basically even, very, very slightly unfavored into Aerodactyl. And now this is where this delineation is really important, because the Executor version of Celebi has the best matchup spread on this chart. Essentially, even in a Mewtwo, very slightly unfavored. Super favored into both variations of Pikachu, Zebstrika, and Raichu variants, almost 70% and 66% essentially. Really strong. I think the heals and the tanking is just too much. That's one of the reasons I loved Executor during the first set, because Erica just blanks a turn from Pikachu essentially, which is really great. It does lose to Gyarados still, just not as bad, but like barely not as bad. And then we have the even matchup, as I previously stated. And then we're beating Scolipede and we're crushing Aerodactyl as well. So the only bad matchup is to Gyarados. Everything else is super winning with the exception of Mewtwo, and it's less than a percentage point difference. So Executor by far has the best score of 5. And then we've got Scolipede, which gets absolutely decimated by everything except Mewtwo. Nothing really to say there. Play Scolipede if you just have like a Razor for Mewtwo, but other than that, just stay away from it. And then we have the Aerodactyl deck. It is losing into Mewtwo, winning into all Pikachu variants and Gyarados, which is interesting, winning into Scolipede and losing to both versions of Celebi, Superior Celebi, Executor EX. So it has a very, very similar matchup spread to Celebi, Executor EX. It's just not quite as good percentage-wise, which is why it has a score of 3. And Scolipede -8, Celebi -2.5, Gyarados 1, Raichu -1, Pikachu -2.5, and Mewtwo 0.5. So statistically, if you're looking to pick a deck that's in the top meta decks, your best bet across the board would be something like Executor or Aerodactyl. Gyarados obviously has a very good spread if you can manage to avoid Pikachu decks and what it seems like to be Aerodactyl. If you can avoid those two decks, you're going to have a really great tournament. So if you go up against like a bunch of Celebi, a bunch of Mewtwo, a bunch of Scolipede, maybe a bunch of like random crap, Gyarados would be really great. Just a couple matchups you got to dodge. And Mewtwo has really decent matchup spread as well. It's just that Gyarados is really popular, and so is Scolipede. And the matches against both Pikachu variants are slightly favored, but it is just slightly favored. So there's nothing like screaming out. So you'll notice that there's only one dark green square, whereas like Executor EX and Aerodactyl have 3 dark green squares, which are very favorable matches. And Gyarados has 2 dark green squares. So take from that what you will. I hope this was like a really informative chart here. And we're just going to go over to, I made a little pie graph here just to show you guys some of the distribution. All right, so here we are with the pie graph. I just wanted to give you guys a visual representation of what the meta looks like at the moment. So Raichu decks, about 4%. Gyarados is about 7%. Celebi is about 7%. Celebi Executors, 2.66%. Scolipede, about 4%. Aerodactyl is about 2%. Golem is about 3%. Arcanine's about 3%. Charizard's about 2.5%. And all the other decks that you could possibly play in the game is 36%. Obviously, I'm not going to like continue to break down all the delineations. Like, they're just like so, there's so many decks, right? I mean, like everybody plays. I mean, we could start getting into like below 2% meta share outside of like Aerodactyl. I mean, that would just be, the list would just be massive, right? But what's interesting is if you combine like, right, the Pikachu variants, that's well over 10%. If you combine the Celebi variants, that's over 10%. And so that's why, you know, I chose the decks that I did. But yeah, I just wanted to make this, you know, kind of just something you guys can look at real quick and just see kind of like where the meta's at. So we've got like the 2 greens next to each other because those are the Celebi variants, the 2 yellow and orange because that's Pikachu, and Raichu variants, the purple's Mewtwo, which is still absolutely huge. I think I accidentally cropped off the Mewtwo stat here. Seems like I accidentally didn't include it, but Mewtwo is 18.5%. That's the purple, which is absolutely enormous. So Mewtwo's a big part of the meta, but that's what the purple share is. Not sure why it's not on the list. But yeah, with that being said, let's just get into the deck lists, and I'm just going to cover those real quick. All right, here we are with some of the basically stock tournament lists that I found off of Limitless. Went with the ones that were like pretty much the most generic. We covered this Scolipede deck. It's very not impressive, especially after we look at all the stats. Pick on Mewtwo if you want. I don't really think it's worth going over. It has an absolutely horrendous score, and should pretty much just be ignored. All right, next we've got Celebi. So the only difference between this really and the heavier Executor builds is they have one more line of Executor. The builds are really similar, but it just seems like basically the more Executor heavy you go, the more heal heavy you go, the better it gets for you. But, it's just still the same concept. You're using Superior to double the energy on Celebi. And, the extra tankiness from the Executors seem to really be helping. So with all the stats, with everything we know, don't know why you wouldn't just max out the Executor line. It just seems to be way better matchup spread-wise. And should definitely just go with the Executor heavy version. And now we've got the Aerodactyl Primate deck. This one had a much larger meta share than the Farfetch'd version. So essentially you're trying to have Primate be your primary attacker for 1 energy, dealing 50 damage. When this goes down, Marshadow comes out and, revenge kills. Sometimes you might end up just sweeping with the Aerodactyl. Sometimes taxing your opponent with Aerodactyl, I'm sure, can be obnoxious for the opponent, making them not able to evolve into their active spot. Hitmonlee is obviously in here as a hedge against Gyarados and seems to work rather well, obviously. We've got double Sabrina for interruption, so I would imagine sometimes against Gyarados, for example, if you don't have the Hitmonlee and they don't bench more than one Pokemon, you can just Sabrina and snipe the Magikarp with a punch from Primeape, so I'm sure that happens a considerable amount as well. And then we've just got the classic staples. We got to get that Hitmonlee into the active spot, the right attacker into the active spot with X-Speed, Old Amber's for the Aerodactyl, Pokeball and Professor's Research for consistency, Sabrina for the disruption and that surprise, KO at the end of the game, and then the one Geo. So just a really hard-hitting, kind of anti-meta feel. The Marshadow really helps against Pikachu. And so, again, this deck has the second best matchup spread. After looking at all the stats, you just have anti-meta card for Magikarp, anti-meta card for Pikachu, and the rest of the deck just hits hard, man. So it just makes a lot of sense why this deck is performing well. Would highly recommend playing this on the ladder in tournaments, anywhere for that matter. Now we have Gyarados. Gyarados is being used in combination with Greninja and Drud to get those pings, so Gyarados can basically one-shot everything, even without the assistance of Giovanni. I personally prefer the build without the Greninja because I just never find my Magikarps whenever I throw a Greninja in the deck, but this deck is performing so well that no one can really deny this is a great deck. With the addition of Leaf, we can make the pivoting out of Drud super easy, and you can always cheese games with Misty, unfortunately, and then the rest of the deck is just consistency with Research and Pokeball. Again, Gyarados being able to one-shot so many things: Mew, Celebi, Aerodactyl, one-shots Mewtwo with Giovanni or a Drud or Greninja poke. So it just makes this deck an absolute force right now. Only thing really keeping it in check is Pikachu. I don't think fighting would be enough to keep it in check, but then fighting would probably just be more popular. Then there'd be something picking on fighting more, which means that we just have a different kind of like rock, paper, scissors format. But that's always a good sign of a healthy meta. And then we have Mewtwo. Nothing's really changed here. You'll see some versions. Most versions I've seen run a Mew over the Jinx, but with the popularity of Grass and Celebi decks and these energy ramping strategies, I can understand it. It's also another single prize Pokemon rather than Mew being a 2-pointer. So I could see that being relevant sometimes, for like body blocking scenarios and things like this. And then so the new innovation is just the slab for consistency, and we have the Leaf. We've been able to, cut one XP because Leaf exists. I think you should just take out the red card and just run like another Leaf or another X speed. But very, very stock Mewtwo, very strong. It's here to stay, folks. And now we've got the Pikachu Raichu build. This is pretty close to what I run myself. I just don't run the Dedenne. I run another Zapdos EX. Everything else is actually almost the same, except that I personally run just one Sabrina and I run 2 Geos because I want my Pikachu to be able to hit Drud for 100 really consistently, so I can try and end the game with some speed. I do enjoy the idea of Electabuzz hitting even a Gyarados in the back and still dying to Raichu. They would need double potion to survive that combination. But yeah, this build basically sacrifices some percentage points in games that you're already heavily favored in to shore up those matchups that are closer, which is why I prefer the Raichu build. But the Zebstrika build is much, much more common and does have a more favored matchup against the decks you're already winning. So it's really just kind of like a player preference thing. And this is the classic Pikachu deck that we're seeing an absolute ton of right now. Zebstrika to snipe the Magikarps, Dedenne to try and cheese, back to 2 Zapdos EXs, and, classic double X speed. I still don't understand why both of these are only running 1 Geo. I think double Geo is really good right now in Pikachu. Consistency cards in the Pokeball and the Research, and then the double Sabrina. So this deck is still doing great. It just statistically doesn't have as good of a matchup spread as the Raichu deck. But yeah, guys, I hope you enjoyed the meta report. Like I said, this took a really long time to put together. I would really appreciate any likes or comments. It would go a really, really long way trying to break through these giant channels out there. And hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time.